Our chalice lighting words this morning are by Elizabeth Handing, a symbol of learning and love. The flaming chalice is a symbol of learning and of love. We Unitarian Universalists don't drink from our chalice. Instead, we use it to hold the flame. The circle of the chalice helps keep the fire small. The flame doesn't blind us. It doesn't burn us. It gives us light so that we can see all the different things in the universe, even the invisible ones, because the Unitarian Universalist flame is a light of learning. Good morning on this smoky Sunday in the middays of fall. We are all experiencing discomfort and great sorrow for those who have been affected by the fires. I'm Martha Sincula, and I'm your service leader today, and I welcome you to the Umpqua Unitarian Universalist Congregation. Our speaker this week is Michael Wheeler, and he will be available after this service for an after-service Zoom session beginning at 11:15. Email invitations with the links so that the service and the meeting are sent out between Saturday evening and Sunday mornings. And if you have not used Zoom yet, Google the Zoom free video conferencing tool and download the free app. You can do this on your phone, your tablet, or computer. Follow the prompts and you can join us. Otherwise, these discussions are recorded so that you can view them anytime on YouTube, just like our services. Links to all our services are in our weekly UmQuest newsletter, where you can click on the links to get the services. We thank Michael Wheeler and Lucy Swangham for their work on producing these videos for our services each week. At this time, I continue to say it's still important to make every effort to stay connected with one another during this physical separation, and of course now with these awful fires. There's a lot of people hurting. I just dropped a couple of letters in the box this morning. Hopefully it'll be received. Please call and check with members of our congregation. If you know how to find us on YouTube, help others who might also find it difficult to do so that many of us as possible can participate in our services. And of course, since you're using the YouTube to view this service, you can click on the red subscribe bar or the link. This will make it much easier to find us this week, each week, actually anytime. Our opening words this morning are from the Dhammapada, verse 223, by the Buddha. With gentleness, overcome anger. With generosity, overcome meanness. With truth, overcome delusion. Now is the time in our service for reflection. Please find a comfortable position. As we take a slow breath in and a slow breath out, let us gather our energies as we participate in this three-part meditation. Listen to the words, spend some time in silence, and enjoy the music. Our words today are by Alfred Lord Tennyson, Ulysses. It may be we shall touch the happy isles and see the great Achilles, whom we knew. Though much is taken, much abides, and though we are not now that strength which in old days moved earth and heaven, that which we are, we are. One equal temper of heroic hearts, made weak by time and fate, but strong in will to strive, to speak, to find, and not to yield. Our speaker today is Michael Wheeler, our Director of Music at UUUC. Michael holds a master's certificate in music theory, harmony, and ear training from the Berklee School of Music, a Bachelor of Arts degree in music history from Charter Oak State College, a Master of Arts in ethnomusicology, which is studying shamanic drumming, Eastern Orthodox chant, and Indo-Persian sacred music and folk dance of the British Isles. A Master of Fine Arts in Music Composition from Vermont College of the Fine Arts, and a Doctor of Sacred Music from the Interfaith Theological Seminary, where his dissertation, Examination of the Meditated and Therapeutic Dance as Practice for Well-Being, was referred to as groundbreaking. And outside of his musical studies, Dr. Wheeler holds advanced diplomas in philosophy, psychology, sociology, as well as being a certified life coach through Ecology, Ltd, UK. He is an ordained minister through the International Metaphysical Ministry, during which time he developed practices of meditation and hypnosis. Michael's primary focus in ministry is examining the role of story in its shaping of the self and the community. He is also our director, videographer, and editor of all our recorded sermons that you are seeing every week and doing excellent work. Thank you, Michael.
Hello, fellow UUers, and thank you for tuning in to this Sunday, where I get to talk about things that I find fascinating and relevant to what is happening in our lives. I started thinking about this subject really over the last couple of fantastic sermons that have been done not only by Donna, but by lay members of the congregation. Certainly Anne Claire's was beautiful. And I really wanted to articulate some of my feelings in regards to things that are difficult to talk about, right? And in this case, I want to broach the subject of how we cope with evil, right? How we cope with malevolence in our world. I was going to say in our community, and certainly that's a problem, but really this is an issue that stretches the world over. Now, the utter hubris of trying to talk about this in a 20-minute sermon is not lost on me. This is a subject that has plagued humanity and philosophers since the beginning. And I don't know how much progress I can make as one lonely or lowly maybe thinker on this subject, but we're going to give it the old college try. So before I start the actual sermon portion, I want to share with you some of my thoughts on the nature of God, and hopefully this will come into play before we wrap up. Unlike other services, I will actually be talking about my own faith and my own opinion when it comes to this subject. And of course, knowing full well that many of you have different beliefs, different belief sources, and different belief parameters. And I would like to hear those, especially in the sermon response that we have on Sunday. So, the nature of God, right? Let's just, for the sake of discussion, we'll just presume that the God creates the universe story is a valid one, right? And so normally when I'm talking about God, I'm talking about God as really whatever you define as God, or God perhaps as our greatest ideal. And those things can still be put into this discussion, but no, I want to talk about an actual intelligent, creative force that formed the universe. Now, one thing that is puzzling, or that has always been puzzling to people talking about the nature of God, is the idea of God defying logical parameters. So for instance, you'll hear the old chestnut of can God create a rock so heavy that he can't lift, right? Another variation of that would be can God create a square circle, right? Could God create a married bachelor? Right. Now, the problem with these kinds of questions is that they defy logic. They defy the idea that if A is equal to B and B is not equal to C, then C is not equal to A, right? There's a little algebraic logic there. So logic dictates that there is actually limits on an omnipotent being's ability. And so one of those things in the creation of the universe is the idea of creating the universe out of nothing, that nothing existed and God willed it or forced it to exist in some way. And for this, you could look at a fantastic lecture by an atheist. He's not a fantastic guy, but he gave a great lecture. Lawrence Krauss, who did a lecture called, and I think he wrote a book about it, called The Universe from Nothing, in which he talks about the idea of nothingness, the idea of no matter, no space, no time, this absence of thing doesn't really exist, which is strange, if you can kind of wrap your mind around that. And so the ex nihilo, right, out of nothing concept would seem to be as illogical as creating a square circle or a married bachelor, right? And if we talk about the parameters of creation, think about artists or or poets or painters. Let's say painters. Now, a painter, we could say, creates a painting, but that's not exactly the process that a painter goes through. What a painter does is arranges material that has already existed, so for instance, the canvas, the paints, using the brush to actually form the painting, right? They're not really creating things so much as they are arranging things according to what they want the final product to be, right? So they haven't created anything out of nothing. They've used pre-existing materials to create something novel. So when we're talking about God in creating the universe, what makes sense? That was there some pre-existing material that he used to form the universe? Or does it defy logic that it was created out of nothing? I would say by definition, it has to be the first. And so the question always comes up of, well, then what existed before the universe? What material did God have? The only logical answer I can come up with is that God had himself, right? And so that is the kind of philosophical premise that I've been working with for a long time, since I came to a theistic belief, to a belief in God. And I know that there are many of you who don't believe in God, and it would be interesting to hear what you have to say, because I also used to be an atheist, so I can definitely sympathize with the atheist position. So now that we've got that out of the way, I want to define evil again from my perspective. Um, and again, this is tough stuff, okay? But defining evil now, there are situations where people are harmed, and I would say that harm and suffering are bad, but not necessarily evil. So, for instance, the man who cheats on his wife with his secretary, it's a terrible trope, but it'll work, right? And the wife finds out about this. Now, she has been betrayed. She has been lied to. She has endured real harm by her husband's actions. But it was not her husband's intention to cause her this harm, right? And so to me, instances like this, which take up the vast majority of sins, we might say, the sin of lying, the sin of theft, the sin of well, even revenge in some cases, although that we can go back to that. These are sins of selfishness, right? These are instances where an individual is looking out for themselves first and disregarding others. Now, to me, that is not evil, although it is behavior that can be reprehensible and ought to be discouraged. When I'm talking about evil, I'm talking about wanton cruelty, right? Cruelty, the intentional harm of other conscious beings with at least that in its own end, right? And you could even go a step beyond that, that there are people who we broadly refer to as sociopaths. These are people who can actually derive enjoyment from harming others. I was listening to the Joe Rogan podcast, and he was interviewing Mike Tyson. And Mike Tyson, the one of probably the greatest boxer to ever live, was talking about aspects of himself that he didn't really like, aspects of himself that he really wanted to leave behind after he left his boxing career. He would talk about how hurting his opponent in the ring was actually sexual. It was orgasmic to him, that he would experience erections when he would think about causing maximal harm to these other people in the ring. And he said that this was worst when he would win a bout in like 30 seconds, that he would go in and just knock the guy out, and he still had all of that rage and that desire to do harm within him, which is one of the things that got him into so much legal trouble. Now, what's interesting to me is that these were aspects of himself that he didn't necessarily like, which kind of flies in the face of what we think about when we think about sociopaths, because when we think about sociopaths deriving enjoyment from harming other people, we don't think of them as necessarily having too much of a conscience. So that's how I define evil. And it seems as though this is something that is fairly unique to humanity. That I was thinking about the lion who kills the offspring of lionesses that are not related to him, right? That male lions are able to smell genetic relationship. And if they don't smell right, then the male lion will kill the cubs of the female lion if she didn't mate with him. And of course, the evolutionary reason for this is that the cubs would provide too much competition for his own offspring. Now, that exists in the animal kingdom, but there's no way that we as humans would accept that as a defense of infanticide. It's, that you imagine somebody in a courtroom saying, "I'm sorry, Your Honor, but I just didn't want the children who aren't mine to be in competition with my children," right? That would never fly. Our ethics dictate that we not behave in a way that nature, when left, because nature is quite cruel. So nature left to herself, all things being permissible, as long as it leads to the extension of the species. As human beings, we have given up some of what we might call those natural rights in order for the sake of the whole. So we can observe this kind of cruelty in nature. And I believe that this cruelty in nature, it's still, even though we live in a society, I think on a genetic level, there is some of it that still resides in us. Some people call it the shadow, the dark side of humanity. And one of the ways that we cope with that is we tell stories. So evil in stories. Now, for the graphic that I sent in for this week's sermon, what you have there is the cover of the Dungeons and Dragons play set. I can't remember when it was, but it was for the Dungeons and Dragons game. And it was probably the most iconic image drawn by Larry Elmore of this bold, strong warrior alone battling against this insurmountable dragon, which is covering great treasure, right? And that one picture tells all of the story that you ever need to know about humanity's quest to overcome, right? So the dragon representing chaos, the dragon representing malevolence, right? You have the lone warrior out to defeat the dragon, and once that dragon is defeated, you have the riches underneath, right? So the story is very simple. Be the warrior, overcome chaos, receive the reward. Right? And you can imagine, especially for young boys, I can tell you that as a 9-year-old boy, I could just stare at that picture for just an hour and just imagine myself in that place. And that really is the crux of the hero story that we have, that has grown up around us and we have grown up around. If you think of comic book heroes or Lord of the Rings or any adventure story, really there is this idea that there is a chaotic or an evil element. And chaos, by the way, chaos is not evil, right? Evil can exist in chaos. It can also exist within order. That if evil exists in order, it can become easily tyrannical, right? But under an orderly situation, we at least know what we're dealing with. That by nature, one of the problems with chaos is, and one of the beautiful things about chaos too, is that we don't understand it, right? So we have to dive into the chaos in order to understand it, making it, creating an order around it, and shaping that to our needs. So if you look at adventure stories, there's the idea of the hero or the heroes who have to venture into the chaos in order to create an orderly society by the end. And when it comes to evil, right, again, so many of the villains in these stories, it's only been recently that we've been able to flesh out the villains in stories as being primarily more selfish or even myopic, narrow-minded in how they approach the world's problems. If you look at, for instance, like the Smurfs, a cartoon that I grew up with, the Gargamel, the evil character, was again just wantonly cruel. He was not someone who had a lot of backstory to him. That changed a lot, I think, as the World War II generation starting to grow up, because one of the things about the boomer generation being taught about World War II was, how do we wrestle with the idea of Hitler? How do we wrestle with the idea of somebody who sought to exterminate an entire people? It is very difficult to wrap your head around that and continue to tell stories about the person who is just pure evil. Because there was a whole scholarship that grew up around trying to understand Hitler. So when we're talking about evil, one of the things that we're talking about is nature versus nurture. That on what level is our moral and our ethical sense born into us, and on what level is it taught to us? Now, our prisons have no shortage at all of individuals who were raised under some of the most atrocious abuses. And it's no secret that, especially when it comes to sexual assault or sexual abuse in early childhood, that those are qualities that a person will then recreate in their adult life, right? We know this to be the case. Actually, I think there was a bill that was in one of the state senates that wanted to list victims, right? And I'm talking victims of sexual abuse, minor victims of sexual abuse, as sexual offenders, because the assumption was that later on in life they were going to do the same thing. So it was up to the state to preemptively protect children from these other people who were in their childhood victims of sexual abuse. So we know the damaging effects that violence and isolation and other types of abuses have on our human psyche. But more difficult to understand, I think, would be the bad seed idea. And this is the idea that someone could be born evil. You know, and again, there is the actual Bad Seed movie, which I think was based off of a book. There was the idea of the Damien character, that the child of Satan idea that could be born with the specific intention to do evil. And how do we wrestle with that? How do we deal with that? How, especially for those of us who are Unitarian Universalists who believe that that the first principle, the worth, the inherent dignity and worth of every person. And I don't have a good answer for this. Is it possible that someone is born evil? Now, of course, I think you and I would agree that it is completely possible for somebody to be born with, say, what we might call a genetic defect, where a individual is born without parts of the brain that allow them empathy. Right. Perhaps they have a tumor in the brain that rests on an area that makes them inherently violent. This was actually the premise for, and you're going to have to forgive me because I have to go back to Star Trek. There was a Star Trek episode of Voyager, Star Trek Voyager, where the ship is transporting criminals, and one of the criminals was a murderer. And during the course of the story, the Doctor finds in this just unrepentant murderer that there's a disconnection in his brain, and the Doctor fixes this disconnection in the brain, and the man who was this psychopath who was just unfeeling and cruel, all of a sudden the weight of what he did slammed down on him. And I have to give it to the actor who played the character. The guy was just unbelievable. He gave an unbelievable performance because he tapped into that element that you and I know very well of regret. That, think about the times that we have said something to someone or gotten into an argument or done something that hasn't been good for us or for the people that we love, and that feeling of shame and that feeling of guilt, right? But again, even though this person, this character, was born with a defect, that it was not necessarily of their choosing. And this is where the paradox really, really comes to fruition. Because like I started out in this discussion, it is a matter of hubris to think that, well, me, but any one of us could solve the problem of evil, in our lifetime, let alone in a service. And so because of that, to me, it's a matter of faith, right? I have to then turn to my belief in an omnipotent, loving, and caring father, right? Father figure, order, a creator of order in the universe, who used himself or itself to create all of the beauty that we have around us. And so then by definition, not only is the world and the stars and the universe an extension of God, but so are we. We are extensions of God. And to me, that grants the most credence to our idea of the first principle. And because every individual is of inherent worth and dignity, I have to believe that that element of compassion and goodness rests in all people, and that rehabilitation is possible. Again, it's a matter of faith, but it's a faith that brings me comfort. And who knows, maybe for you as well. I so deeply appreciate you listening to what I have to say, and I would love to be able to discuss this on our post-service discussion. I hope you all have a great day. Bye-bye.
Our closing words are by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Every man must decide whether he will walk in the light of creative altruism or in the darkness of destructive selfishness. May it be so.